The Manhattan skyline gleamed against the twilight as Amara Jackson stood in the marble lobby of Blackstone Industries, her worn cleaning uniform a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Just hours ago, she'd been invisible, another black woman pushing a mop through corporate corridors. Now, she faced the most powerful CEO in New York, holding a document that would change everything. The billionaire's mocking laughter still echoed in her mind. Translate this and my salary is yours. He'd meant it as a cruel joke. He had no idea who she really was. What would you do if the world saw only your uniform, not your brilliance? Asterisk. Amara Jackson moved through the 40th floor of Blackstone Industries with practiced invisibility. At 30, her dark skin held a youthful glow that belied the storms she'd already weathered. Her black hair, thick and natural, was always pulled back in a simple bun. To the executives who rushed past her each morning, she was furniture necessary but unnoticed. They saw the gray uniform, the industrial cleaning cart, the downcast eyes. They never saw the woman who spoke in measured tones when addressed, who kept her responses to yes sir and right away ma'am. In the supply closet that served as her break room, Amara kept a small locker. Behind bottles of industrial cleaner and spare rags, hidden from curious eyes, sat a faded leather journal. Its pages, already yellowing despite being only 5 years old, contained notes in 12 different languages, Sanskrit annotations flowing alongside Mandarin characters, Arabic merging into Russian Cyrillic. The margins overflowed with linguistic theories, etymological connections, and grammatical structures from languages most people couldn't even name. Each night, during her 10-minute break, she traced these words with calloused fingers, whispering conjugations under her breath like prayers to a god who'd stopped listening. The other cleaners thought she was reading a Bible. Maria, who worked the 39th floor, once asked if she was religious. Amara had simply nodded, not explaining that her worship was of language itself, that these notes were her dissertation draft from Harvard, the masterwork that should have launched her into academic stardom. Instead, it lived in a cleaning closet, growing more faded with each passing month, like its author's dreams. Marcus Blackstone, the company's 45-year-old CEO, passed her every morning at 6:47 precisely. His routine never varied. Italian leather shoes clicking against marble, Armani suit impeccable, cell phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders to Tokyo or London. He never looked at her, never acknowledged her presence as she mopped the executive hallway. To him, she was part of the building's infrastructure, no different from the automatic doors or climate control system. Sometimes, foreign dignitaries would accompany him, speaking in languages they assumed no cleaning lady could understand. They discussed sensitive deals in French, negotiated in Arabic, shared secrets in Mandarin. Amara would lower her head, push her mop in steady strokes, and file away every word in her extraordinary mind. 5 years ago, Amara Williams had been someone else entirely. The youngest black woman ever admitted to Harvard's linguistics PhD program at age 20. She'd mastered 15 languages by age 25. The UN had courted her for simultaneous interpretation at the Security Council. The State Department had offered her positions that would have taken her to embassies across 6 continents. Her professors called her a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent who could decode ancient texts as easily as she navigated modern diplomatic communications. Dr. Chen, the department chair, had compared her to the legendary polyglots of history Giuseppe Mezzofanti, Emile Krebs, Cato Loam, but Amara had surpassed them all, her young mind absorbing linguistic patterns like a supercomputer processing code. The photograph in her locker captured that moment of triumphant graduation from the master's program, standing between her beaming professors, the Widener Library steps behind them. She wore her academic regalia with pride, the gold honor cords draped over her shoulders representing achievements in classical languages, modern languages, and computational linguistics. Professor Okafor had his arm around her shoulders, his face glowing with mentor's pride. Dr. Sarah Matthews, who taught her Sanskrit, dabbed at tears. They'd all believed she would revolutionize the field of linguistics. Her dissertation proposal, Neural Pathways and Polyglot Language Acquisition, a comprehensive analysis of cognitive processing in multilingual individuals, had been approved with unprecedented enthusiasm. But it was Dr. Richard Steinberg who stood at the center of the photo, his hand possessively placed on her thesis draft. At 62, with silver hair and kind eyes, he'd been more than an advisor, he'd been the father figure she'd never had. Growing up in Roxbury, raised by a grandmother who cleaned houses for a living, Amara had seen in Steinberg everything she aspired to become. He'd taken her to conferences, introduced her to the giants in their field, spent countless hours refining her theories. She trusted him completely, which made the betrayal cut even deeper. The discovery came by accident. She'd been searching for a reference in the Journal of Linguistic Anthropology when she found either research, her words, her groundbreaking theory on cross-linguistic neural mapping, published under Steinberg's name. Not just one paper, but 3. Months of her work, conversations they'd had in his office, insights she'd shared over coffee, all transformed into his latest breakthrough. The academic community was buzzing about Professor Steinberg's revolutionary approach to understanding how polyglots process multiple languages simultaneously. He was being nominated for the Prix Rousseau, linguistics' highest honor, based on her discoveries. When she confronted him, the mask finally dropped. Gone was the kindly mentor, replaced by a man who looked at her with cold calculation. "I've been publishing for 40 years, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You've been here for 5. Whose name carries weight? Whose reputation opens doors?" When she threatened to go to the administration, he laughed. A young black woman from Roxbury accusing one of Harvard's most distinguished professors? Who do you think they'll believe? "I've built relationships here since before you were born. One word from me, and your career is over." The investigation that followed was a masterclass in institutional protection. Despite timestamps on her computer files, despite email chains showing her development of the ideas, despite testimony from fellow graduate students who'd heard her present these theories months before Steinberg's publications, the committee found insufficient evidence of academic misconduct. What they did find was concerning irregularities in Amara's research methods, questions about the originality of her work, and troubling signs of academic instability. The message was clear: fight this, and we'll destroy you. Her funding vanished overnight. Her keycard stopped working. Professors who'd once competed for her attention now walked past without acknowledgement. The whisper network that every graduate student fears became her daily reality. She was unstable, difficult, a plagiarist who tried to steal credit from her betters. Even students she tutored began to avoid her. The final blow came in a formal letter. Her enrollment in the PhD program was terminated effective immediately. Security escorted her from campus, like a criminal, past the same Widener Library steps where she'd once posed for triumphant photos. The months that followed blurred into a haze of closed doors and unreturned calls. Every academic position required references. Every reference check led back to Harvard, to carefully worded warnings about academic integrity concerns. She applied to teach high school, to work at language learning companies, even to return to interpreting. Nothing. The girl who spoke 15 languages couldn't get a job teaching Spanish to 6th graders. Depression settled over her like fog, heavy and disorienting. The grandmother who'd raised her, who'd cleaned houses to put her through school, died that winter, taking with her the last person who believed Amara was destined for greatness. Cleaning was the only job that didn't require references. The agency that staffed Blackstone Industries didn't care about her education. In fact, they preferred not to know. They needed someone reliable, someone who could pass a background check, someone who would show up at 5 in the morning and push a mop without complaint. Amara Williams, linguistic prodigy, became Amara Jackson, invisible custodian. She'd chosen Jackson because it was anonymous, common, forgettable. Just like she'd become. The morning everything changed started with the usual pre-dawn commute from her studio apartment in Queens. She'd been awake since 3:30. Her body trained to the rhythms of service work. The subway car was filled with the city's invisible Army hospital workers, security guards, food service staff, all traveling while the wealthy slept. She found her usual spot in the back corner, earbuds in but playing no music, listening instead to the languages around her. The Haitian nurses speak in Creole, the Russian construction workers arguing about football, the Chinese grandmother muttering about her grandson's poor choices. Her mind automatically translated, parsed, analyzed. Even now, even reduced to this, she couldn't stop her brain from doing what it did best. Blackstone Industries Tower pierced the Manhattan sky like a glass and steel needle. its top floors lost in low-hanging clouds. She entered through the service entrance, nodding to Carlos, the night security guard who was just ending his shift. In the basement locker room, she changed into her uniform gray polyester that smelled perpetually of industrial bleach no matter how many times she washed it. The other cleaners were already there, gathered around coffee and yesterday's donuts. They welcomed her with the easy camaraderie of shared struggle, not knowing that the woman who sat with them had once been invited to lecture at the Sorbonne. Her assigned floors were 38 through 42, the executive levels where decisions affecting thousands were made daily. She started at the bottom, working her way up, a routine so ingrained she could do it without thinking. Vacuum the carpets in a specific pattern. Empty waste baskets, replacing the liners with hospital corners. Dust surfaces with microfiber cloths, always clockwise. Clean windows until they vanished, becoming portals to the city beyond. In the pre-dawn darkness, she was alone with her thoughts and the ghosts of who she used to be. It was on the 40th floor, outside the main conference room, that she heard the commotion. Marcus Blackstone's voice carried through the walls, sharp with barely controlled fury. $300 million. $300 million on the line because nobody in this building can read a simple document. Something crashed a coffee mug against a wall. From the sound, Amara continued mopping, keeping her movement steady, but her ears tracked every word. Through the glass walls, she could see the scene unfolding. Blackstone stood at the head of the conference table, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His tie hung loose, his hair mussed from running his hands through it. Around him, a dozen executives sat in various states of panic. Patricia Winters, his executive assistant, typed frantically on her laptop. David Chen, head of international relations, a man whose Mandarin was passable, at best held his head in his hands. The atmosphere vibrated with the particular tension of impending corporate disaster. The Singapore Consortium gave us an exclusive negotiation window, Blackstone continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. 48 hours to review their amendments and respond. That was 42 hours ago. And now you're telling me that none of our translators, none of the firms we pay millions, token read this dialect? The document in question was displayed on the conference room's smart screen, 2 pages of dense Chinese text. Even from her position outside, Amara could see it wasn't standard Mandarin. The characters were traditional, not simplified, with peculiar formations that suggested regional variations. Her mind automatically began parsing the structure, identifying the linguistic patterns, before she forced herself to look away. Not her problem, not anymore. It's not just Chinese, David Chen explained, his voice strained. It's Hokkien, but a specific variant used in maritime law. The Singapore sellers know exactly what they're doing. They're testing us, seeing if we have anyone who truly understands their culture, not just their business language. Our translators can give us the general meaning, but legal documents require precision. One misunderstood character could cost us millions. Then find someone who can read it. Blackstone slammed his palm on the table. Call the UN. Call Yale, Harvard, Oxford. I don't care if you have to wake up every linguistics professor on the East Coast. We are not losing this deal because of a language barrier. Patricia spoke up, her voice carefully modulated. Sir, I've been calling for the past 6 hours. It's not just about finding someone who speaks Hokkien. We need someone who understands the legal terminology, the cultural context, the maritime shipping references. The few experts we've found all say they need days to properly translate it. We have less than 6 hours. Amara had moved closer, ostensibly to clean the glass doors. The text on the screen drew her like a magnet. Her brain was already translating, unable to stop itself. First paragraph. Standard opening, but with honorifics that indicated the sellers were a traditional family company. Second paragraph. The real meat, discussing port rights dating back to colonial times. Third paragraph. That was interesting. A reference to Buddhist principles embedded in the business terms. They weren't just testing language skills, they were testing cultural understanding. It was then that Blackstone saw her, his eyes, bloodshot from stress and lack of sleep, fixed on her through the glass. For 5 years, she'd been invisible to him, a ghost who kept his empire clean. But desperation has a way of making people see what they usually ignore. A cruel smile twisted his lips, the expression of a man about to take out his frustrations on someone who couldn't fight back. "Open the door," he commanded Patricia. The assistant hesitated, confused, but complied. Blackstone's voice carried the false joviality of a bully who'd found a target. "You know what? We're going about this all wrong. We're calling experts, professors, translators, but maybe we're overthinking it. Maybe it's actually simple. So simple that even—" He gestured at Amara with theatrical mockery. "Even the cleaning lady could do it." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some executives genuinely found it funny, the absurdity of their desperation leading to this moment. Others laughed because their boss expected it, their nervous chuckles a form of corporate survival. Amara stood in the doorway, mop in hand, keeping her face carefully blank. She'd learned long ago that showing emotion only gave them more ammunition. "Come in," Blackstone commanded, his voice dripping condescension. "Don't be shy. I'm sure someone like you has hidden talents we've never suspected." More laughter. Patricia looked mortified but said nothing. David Chen studied his phone, avoiding eye contact. The other executives watched with the fascination of Romans at the Colosseum, waiting for the blood sport to begin. Amara entered slowly, each step measured. She'd been in this room countless times, but never like this. Never as the center of attention, never as the focus of their collective gaze. The conference room smelled of expensive cologne, fierce sweat, and bitter coffee. She could feel their eyes cataloging every detail, her worn shoes, her calloused hands, the way she kept her gaze lowered. They saw what they expected to see. A nobody, a nothing, someone whose existence barely registered in their world. "Tell me," Blackstone continued, warming to his theme, "where did you go to school?" "No, wait, let me guess. You probably didn't finish high school, did you? That's why you're here, pushing a mop, cleaning up after your betters." He turned to his audience, playing to them now. "But hey, maybe she's been secretly studying Mandarin between toilet cleanings. Maybe she's a savant. Stranger things have happened, right?" Patricia finally found her voice. "Marcus, this isn't appropriate. What's inappropriate is losing $300 million because everyone in this room is useless," he snapped. Then turning back to Amara with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a child. "Can you read this?" He gestured at the screen. "Do you even know what language this is?" Amara raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time in 5 years. In that moment, she made a choice. Not for him, not for them, but for herself. For the girl who dreamed in 15 languages. For the woman who'd been silenced, erased, made invisible. For every morning she'd heard them speak about her as if she weren't there. Every casual cruelty, every assumption that she was less than human because she cleaned their offices. "May I see the full document?" she asked quietly. The laughter stopped as if cut by a knife. Blackstone's smile faltered. The executives exchanged glances. Was she serious? Was this actually happening? Patricia's fingers froze over her laptop. David Chen looked up from his phone, sudden interest flickering in his eyes. "You're serious?" Blackstone's voice carried a note of uncertainty now, but he covered it with increased mockery. "You actually think you can read this? Fine. Let's make it interesting. You translate this document just one paragraph, hell, just one sentence correctly, and I'll pay you my annual salary. $2.3 million. What do you say, cleaning lady? Want to play?" The room held its breath. This had stopped being funny. There was something about the way Amara stood there, calm and composed despite the humiliation, that shifted the atmosphere. She nodded once, a simple dip of her head. "I'll need to see all pages, not just what's on the screen. And I'll need to know the context, what kind of agreement this is, what the negotiations have covered so far." Blackstone's face flushed red. She wasn't playing her assigned role. She was supposed to stammer, make excuses, shuffle away in embarrassment. Instead, she stood there making reasonable requests like a professional. "Give her the tablet," he barked at Patricia. "Let's see how far this charade goes." Patricia handed over the device, her fingers brushing Amara's. Their eyes met for a moment, and Amara saw something unexpected, not pity, but curiosity. The document filled the screen, dense with traditional Chinese characters. But Amara's trained eyes saw beyond the surface. This wasn't just Hokkien. It was a specialized variant used in the Straits settlements, infused with Malay loanwords and British colonial legal terminology. The kind of language that existed at the intersection of cultures, comprehensible only to those who understood not just words but histories. She scrolled through slowly, her mind automatically parsing, translating, contextualizing. The sellers weren't being difficult for the sake of it. They were an old family firm, established in the 1880s, built on traditions that predated modern Singapore. This document was their way of ensuring that any buyer would respect not just their assets, but their legacy. Hidden in the subclauses were references to family burial grounds, ancestor worship sites, employee festivals that had been celebrated for over a century. They wanted guarantees that their company's soul would survive the acquisition, not just its profits. The room watched in silence as she read. Something in her posture had changed. The woman holding the tablet wasn't a cleaning lady anymore. Her shoulders had straightened, her eyes moved with the rapid precision of someone processing complex information. Without realizing it, she'd shifted into the stance she used to take at Harvard's podium: authoritative, confident, brilliant. "This isn't a standard amendment," she began, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone lean forward. "It's a cultural compatibility test disguised as a legal document. They've embedded multiple linguistic layers, each requiring different cultural knowledge to properly interpret." She looked up at Blackstone. "Your translators were right to be cautious. A literal translation would miss the entire point." She turned the tablet toward the smart screen, mirroring the display. "See this character here? It's not standard Chinese. It's a variant specific to Hokkien maritime families, indicating ancestral obligation. And this phrase it references a Qing dynasty trade agreement that still influences how these families view business partnerships. They're not asking for more money or better terms, they're asking for respect." Moving through the document with surgical precision, Amara explained each section. The financial terms were straightforward, but wrapped in cultural expectations. The operational agreements included provisions for traditional holidays that weren't on any Western calendar. The intellectual property clauses referenced concepts of collective family ownership that had no direct English equivalent. She translated not just words, but meanings, not just text, but context. "The most crucial part is here," she continued, highlighting a section near the end. "They've embedded a classical Chinese poem about trust and mutual understanding. It's from the Tang Dynasty, but they've modified it slightly. The modification is the key. They're saying that business without cultural understanding is like a river without a source. It will dry up, no matter how promising it looks initially." The conference room had become a classroom, and Amara, its professor, she explained how certain characters had been chosen for their visual similarity to others, creating double meanings visible only to those who truly understood the language. She identified Buddhist concepts woven through commercial terms, Confucian principles underlying the partnership structure. This wasn't just translation, it was cultural archaeology, and she was expertly excavating meanings that had been buried in plain sight. "They want 3 specific guarantees," she concluded, setting down the tablet. "First, that their employees' traditional rest days, including some that date back to agricultural cycles, will be honored. Second, that the company's original Hokkien name will be preserved alongside any rebrand, appearing on all official documents. Third, that the family burial ground on the port property will remain untouched, with access guaranteed for traditional ceremonies. Meet these conditions, respond in their dialect acknowledging their heritage, and they'll sign, fail to understand, and they'll walk away regardless of the money." The silence that followed was absolute. Blackstone stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the mockery drained from his face like blood from a wound. Patricia had tears in her eyes. David Chin stared at Amara as if seeing a ghoster, perhaps a god. The other executives sat in stunned silence, their worldview rearranging itself in real time. The cleaning lady they'd ignored for 5 years had just solved a problem their best people couldn't touch. It was Patricia who broke the silence. "How?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know all this?" Amara looked at her, then at Blackstone, then at each face around the table. For 5 years, she'd been invisible. Now, with all eyes upon her, she made a choice. Not for drama, not for revenge, but for truth. Because silence had protected her, but it had also imprisoned her. And she was tired of being in a cage of her own making. "My name is Dr. Amara Williams," she said quietly. 5 years ago, I was completing my doctorate in linguistics at Harvard. I speak 15 languages fluently, including several Chinese dialects. I've studied historical maritime trade languages as part of my research into cultural preservation through linguistic evolution. I was 3 months from defending my dissertation when my career was destroyed by a man who stole my work and published it as his own. She pulled out her phone, swiping to a photo she'd kept despite the pain it caused. Her younger self in academic regalia, surrounded by professors, the Widener Library steps behind them. She held it up, letting them see. That's me, receiving the Bromwich Prize for Excellence in Linguistic Research. That's Professor Chen, who called me the future of computational linguistics. That's Dr. Matthews, who said I had the finest mind for languages she'd encountered in 30 years of teaching. And that, she pointed to Steinberg, is the man who ended my career because I threatened his ego. The executive stared at the photo, then at her, unable to reconcile the images. Patricia reached for the phone, studying the photo with growing amazement. This is really you? But then why? Why am I cleaning your offices? Amara's laugh was bitter. Because when a distinguished white professor with 40 years at Harvard says you're a plagiarist, an unstable woman who tried to steal his work, doors close. When every job requires references and your references have been poisoned, you take what you can get. When you need to eat, to pay rent, to survive, you stop being picky about how far you've fallen. She looked directly at Blackstone. You asked if I could read your document. I've read it, translated it, and explained it. I've solved your $300 million problem. I did it not because of your cruel joke about your salary, but because those sellers deserve partners who understand them. They've built something meaningful over generations. They deserve respect, not just money. Blackstone found his voice, though it came out strangled. The offer. I said my salary. I'll honor that. $2.3 million. You've more than earned it. Amara smiled then, and it wasn't bitter or angry. It was the smile of someone who'd found something more valuable than money self-respect. I don't want your money, Mr. Blackstone. I translated that document for them, not for you. They deserve partners who see them as more than just an acquisition target. As for your salary, she paused, gathering her things. I've lived on $28,000 a year for 5 years. I've learned that dignity isn't something you can buy or sell. She turned to David Chen. The response needs to be in their dialect, acknowledging each of their concerns specifically. Reference the Tang poem, but complete it. They started the verse. You need to finish it. Show them you understand not just their language, but their literature. Include a formal acknowledgement of their family's contribution to Singapore's maritime history. And for God's sake, have someone who actually speaks Hokkien check it before you send it. As she moved toward the door, Blackstone called out, Wait, we need you. Name your price. Consultant, translator, full executive position. Whatever you want. Amara paused at the threshold. What I want is something you can't give me 5 years of my life back. But what I'll take is this moment. The moment when you all saw me. Not the uniform, not the mop, but me. She looked around the room one last time. I've been here every morning for 5 years. I've heard your conversations, your deals, your casual cruelties. I've been invisible by choice because visibility once cost me everything. But today reminded me that silence is its own kind of death. Patricia stood up. Please, at least let us pay you for the translation. The standard rate for emergency specialized translation is, The standard rate doesn't apply to ghosts, Amara interrupted gently. And that's what I've been, what I chose to be, out of fear and pain. But ghosts can't help anyone, including themselves. She pulled a business card from her pocket, one of the old ones, from her Harvard days, that she'd kept for reasons she couldn't explain. She placed it on the table. If you genuinely want to honor what I've done, donate the fee to the Roxbury Community Center. They run a language program for immigrant children. Help them see that their words, their languages, their cultures have value. The card sat on the polished conference table. Dr. Amara Williams, PhD candidate, Department of Linguistics, Harvard University. A relic from another life, another world. The executive stared at it as if it were an artifact from a lost civilization. Which, in a way, it was. One more thing, Amara added. The Singapore sellers included a test within a test. On the second page, third paragraph, there's a character that's deliberately written incorrectly. It's an old merchant tradition include a flaw to see if the other party is truly paying attention. Correct it in your response. That will tell them everything they need to know about whether you're worthy partners. She left then, walking out with the same measured pace she'd entered with. But everything had changed. The woman pushing the cleaning cart down the hallway was the same and yet entirely different. For 5 years, she'd moved through these halls like a ghost, allowing fear to keep her silent. Now, with each step, she felt herself becoming solid again, real again, visible again. Behind her, in the conference room, chaos erupted. Patricia was already on the phone, desperately trying to find someone who could craft the response Amara had outlined. David Chen was frantically taking notes, trying to capture everything she'd said. The other executives were talking over each other, processing what they'd just witnessed, and Marcus Blackstone stood at the head of the table, staring at the business card, his entire worldview in ruins. The next morning, Amara didn't come to work. There was no dramatic resignation, no grand gesture. She simply didn't show up. Her locker in the basement was empty, except for a note. The invisible woman has left the building. Carlos, the security guard, found it when he came to investigate why she hadn't clocked in. He'd always liked Amara, one of the few who said good morning, who asked about his grandchildren. He pocketed the note, understanding somehow that it was meant for him as much as anyone. The Singapore deal went through. David Chen, following Amara's instructions to the letter, had crafted a response that brought tears to the seller's eyes. They signed immediately, waiving several conditions they'd planned to negotiate. Finally, the patriarch of the family had said, "Partners who see us." The financial press called it the deal of the year. Blackstone Industries stock soared. Marcus Blackstone gave interviews about the importance of cultural understanding in global business, never mentioning the woman who'd saved his empire. But in the Roxbury Community Center, something beautiful was happening. An anonymous donation of $2.3 million had arrived, earmarked for language education. The note attached said simply, "For the children who speak in many voices, may they never be silenced." The program expanded, hiring teachers, buying books, creating spaces where immigrant children could learn that their languages were treasures, not burdens. 6 months later, Yasmin Patel, a sophomore at Columbia studying journalism, was working on a story about corporate diversity. She'd been interviewing cleaning staff at major companies, trying to understand the invisible workforce that kept corporate America running. In her research, she came across a strange story whispers among the overnight workers at Blackstone Industries about the cleaning woman who disappeared, the ghost who turned out to be a genius. It took her 3 months to track down Amara. She found her in Brooklyn, teaching at a small language school for refugee children. The woman who answered the door was different from the descriptions she'd gathered: confident, vibrant, alive. They talked for hours, Amara sharing her story with the first person who'd ever asked for it. Yasmin's article, The Invisible Genius, How Corporate America Fails to See Brilliance in Unexpected Places, went viral. It sparked conversations about talent, prejudice, and the cost of assumptions. But Amara didn't read the article. She was too busy teaching 7-year-old Fatima how to write her name in both Arabic and English, showing her that she could be both things, speak both languages, live both cultures. She was too busy being visible, being useful, being herself. The classroom was small, the pay modest, but when her students looked at her, they saw possibility. They saw someone who understood that language was power, that words could open worlds, that being multilingual was a superpower, in a globe that pretended borders mattered more than connections. On the wall of her classroom hung a single photograph not from Harvard, not from her triumph at Blackstone Industries, but from her first day teaching at the refugee center. She was surrounded by children from 12 different countries, their faces bright with the joy of being understood. At the bottom, in careful calligraphy, she'd written in 15 languages the same message: "Your voice matters." Marcus Blackstone never learned what became of her. Sometimes, late at night in his corner office, he'd think about that morning about the woman he'd mocked who'd saved his company. He'd had Patricia try to find her, to offer her any position she wanted, but Amara Williams had vanished as completely as she'd once appeared. The business card still sat in his desk drawer, a reminder of the day he'd learned that brilliance could come from anywhere, that assumptions were expensive, that the people you overlook might be the ones you need most. The other cleaning staff at Blackstone Industries told her story to new hires, embellished with each telling. In their version, she'd made Blackstone beg, had demanded millions, had walked out with her head high while executives groveled. The truth was simpler and more powerful. She'd simply chosen to be seen and then chosen to disappear on her own terms. She'd refused to let them define her worth in dollars, had insisted that dignity wasn't negotiable, had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. In the end, Amara Jackson's legacy at Blackstone Industries wasn't the Singapore deal or the humiliation of a billionaire CEO. It was the way Patricia Winters started learning Mandarin, determined never to be caught helpless again. It was how David Chen began actually studying the cultures behind the languages he claimed to speak. It was the way some executives started nodding to the cleaning staff, wondering what brilliance might be hiding behind those gray uniforms. Small changes perhaps, but revolutions often start with someone simply refusing to be invisible anymore. The city moved on, as cities do. New scandals replaced old ones, new deals overshadowed past triumphs, but in a classroom in Brooklyn, in a community center in Roxbury, in the minds of children who grew up believing their multilingual abilities were gifts rather than burdens, Amara's choice echoed forward. She'd been silenced once by someone who'd stolen her voice. She'd been silenced again by fear and survival. But in that conference room, facing a man who saw her as nothing, she'd found her voice again. And this time, she'd used it not for revenge or gain, but for truth. Some battles are won not with power, but with dignity. Some victories are measured not in dollars, but in the moment you choose to stop being invisible. If you were her, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have dared to speak? Asterisk.